guys, it's Liv here, bringing you guys the next video of BBL week. Today we're doing our, this is the doc that I've constructed to convey the easiest, the best non-Ubers to draft in the BBL format. Now, originally this was going to be just for round 1 and 2 Ubers. However, I decided to expand it a bit because I felt a bit too limited and I felt like it was going to get into the same sort of points. And I felt like this is just an easier way to convey it. So these are just a small sample, keep in mind, a small sample of really good Ubers to draft, well, really good non-Ubers to draft in the BBL format. Now I've divided this into a few different points. We have the round 1 non-Ubers, we have the psychic checks, strong walls, megas, fairy checks, fairy types, dark checks, trap Pokemon, which are not trapping Pokemon, those are very different. Most improved, ghost checks, strong removal, non-Uber win cons, physical and special breakers, support, and other. So of course, if you guys do enjoy the video, leave a like down below. And before you click off, because you can already see this, 1, this doc will be linked down below. And 2, the fact that I'm going to go into my reasonings for everything, obviously, here. On top of also what I categorize, or what my criteria was for each category. So first things first, I do want to mention that anytime I listed a mega and I put the non-mega in the same category, I added an asterisk, same as the non-mega versus the mega, or any similar Pokemon like Chansey and Blissey, Nidoqueen and Nidoking, etc, etc. I made sure that I put notes on everything. There are a few other Pokemon, like for example, Mega Swampert in Trap Pokemon, you can see that there. I put a note saying rain as a whole, and I'll get into that again when we get to that category. But I did make sure to do that so that then you guys can see what goes under each thought process, because otherwise, for example, for strong walls, Blissey would have obviously been there, Slowbro and Slowbro Mega would have been on there, Slowking and Slowking Galar would have been on there, and it gets to a lot longer of a list. And I felt like that this way I could condense it a bit more, still have talking points, and you guys can still see it just in case if, let's say, you're sharing it with a friend who maybe didn't watch the video for some reason, or just anything else of that sort of action to where it would be unclear. And the other thing as well is I put category notes on each of the categories based on like a summary of the category. For example, for round 1 non-Ubers, the note is non-Ubers you should consider getting round 1 if you want a less desirable Uber. I felt like it was pretty self-explanatory, but if we go to something like, for example, let's say support. This is for strong removal, strong support through hazard stack and screens. So this separates from removal because I felt like it was a very different camp, whereas not necessarily from like Rapid Swim versus Defoggers. That didn't really feel different enough. Then like trap Pokemon, I put a note specifically for this, which I'll get into trap Pokemon again specifically when we get there. But in general though, I did just want to mention that because I felt like, again, it was very important. So with that said though, let's get into the list. So the first thing we have is the round 1 non-Uber. So as I mentioned, these are the non-Ubers you should consider getting round 1 if you want a less desirable Uber. So this would be like if you're getting a Lugia, or maybe you're getting like a regular Giratina, or something that typically does not go round 1. Now there are certain Ubers that do, or that sometimes will go round 1, but typically don't. And maybe you end up choking and you get sniped. However, these are some good non-Ubers that you can get that work well with a lot of the pool. So first up, so this list, what I'll do is I'll go through each of the list, and then I'll go through why each Pokemon's in there. So this list consists of Mew, Mega Lopunny, Tapu Lele, Celesteela, Landorus, Mega Gallade, Mega Dansey, Garchomp, and Tornti. So I want to preface, this list as well is not in any sort of particular order. It's just in the order these Pokemon came to mind in. So this is not like the best to the worst in this category. I want to make that very clear. This is not best to worst. It is in order that it came to my head. So Mew was the first Pokemon. Mew is a very, very good round one non-Uber. If it makes it to round 2, I'd be shocked. Typically it will go, I would assume round 1 if I had to guess, like later end, or maybe it'll go like early round 2, but typically though, Mew is a very easy Pokemon to pick. You can do whatever you want. It's probably one of the best 17-point ones on the board. Mega Lopunny just historically has performed pretty well. It's always, especially this generation, been just a really strong performer. I believe it's 4th or 5th overall all-time on the BBL history doc, which again that'll be for Friday's video, but I did feel like that very much played into the reasoning. But yeah, Mega Lopunny is 4th all-time BBL, which is insane because most of those kills are Gen 8, just to put in perspective. We have Tapu Lele here, mostly just because of all the Psychic Ubers, things like Lunala, Deoxys Attack, and also Normal, I guess, if you want to go that route. Mewtwo, stuff like that. Tapu Lele just was a good, scary support option with. Definitely not the best. I would probably just get your Psychic Uber first. But hey, if you feel like gambling, who knows? Maybe you can, I mean, typically you can probably get this before you can get Deoxys Attack, and that would be smart. But like if you're getting a Lunala, I would not chance that. Celesteela, just general, really, really strong wall. Helps with a lot of things. I would highly recommend getting this Pokemon in round 1 if you want an Uber that's less desirable. Landorus's Eye is a non-Uber. I very much expect this to go round 1, even though it is not worth it, just because of the fact that things like Pull or Shifu, etc. are Ubers. And I know that people are gonna 100% like maul over that, but it's really not worth the round 1 pick in my opinion. It will go round 1 anyway though, so I felt like it was worth mentioning. It's still not a bad Pokemon. Like, personally, I just think it's less worth it than other things in this list. Really just more so than Mew and Selly, but I probably wouldn't get anything else on this list round 1 besides maybe like Mega Gallade. But even then, that would be like really maybe territory. Most of these I would not get round 1. Typically though, I'm a firm believer of getting my Uber first. But as a whole though, if you don't want to get your Uber first, it's still not a bad one. I just personally wouldn't really go for it. And then we get into other options, like as I said, Mega Gallade and Mega Diancie. Both are strong ones, strong performers overall. Mega Gallade has a lot of good coverage, especially this gen with like Triple Axle, for example, hitting a ton of dragons super effectively, which again, a lot of the format is. Mega Diancie, again, similar to Mega Gallade, just the speed and the mixed offenses, unlike Mega Gallade, do give this a benefit, which Mega Gallade does not have, of course. Garchomp is really good. Again, another high performer in BBL. It is 9th overall all time, which again is pretty impressive. Garchomp in general has really good typing, both defensively and offensively. Really good check to things like Blaziken defensively too, which is really important because it's just one of those Pokemon that is good to have a check for. But even outside of that, it does handle a lot of Ubers pretty well, especially outpacing most of the Dragon ones. And then we have Torntea. Torntea is just a good Pokemon. Personally, I wouldn't probably get it round 1. I would probably get this round 2 though, like really early round 2. But it is still a good Pokemon nonetheless. So that is it for our round 1 non-Ubers, or round 1, round 2 technically, but still really good non-Ubers. On to our next column, our Psychic checks. So these are the Psychic switch-ins, or the mons that can not only switch in, but also handle Psychic types really well. Whether offensive or defensively, I felt like this was very important to have. A lot of people, for some reason, don't actually get a Dark type. I don't know why. These are mostly Dark types, however, there are a couple exceptions, which I'll get into later on, or I think like an exception with 2 technical forms. But yeah, so we have Tyranitar here with including the Mega. Really, really good Spatmon, especially with just the Sand ability as well on it with Sandstream, just getting the extra Spadef boost. Regular T-Tar has the ability to run Berries, of course, or AV even to take on hits. Mega T-Tar just has the extra bulk natively, which does definitely help with taking on these Pokemon for sure. Mega Gyarados. Mega Gyarados is a really good Psychic check, in my opinion. Naturally, it has the most Spadef of any Mega Pokemon in all of the game, actually, surprisingly enough. And not only that, but just it's just a naturally fat Pokemon that can actually set up on a lot of good Psychic types. With just one Dragon Dance, you could definitely take advantage of a lot of them and just start going to town. So I think Mega Gyarados is definitely a really good option. We have Mandibuzz, of course, just a naturally fat Psychic check. Really, there's like no Psychic type that can damage this thing in the entire game. With Scizor, including the non-Mega and Mega forms, really the only non-Dark type that I put on this list. Mega Scizor is just a really good pick overall. And not only that, but it's able to check a lot of really threatening Ubers, such as a fair bit of Dragons that maybe don't get fire coverage, though a fair bit of them do. Overall, though, it's a great Xerneas check. It's also a great Psychic check for things like Lunala, for example. However, it will definitely... Some of them do definitely get fire coverage, and you need to keep that in mind. However, Scizor can, to an extent, definitely take these hits. Definitely a looser Psychic check to say the least, but to be fair, a lot of Psychics do get fighting and even fairy coverage in this format, depending on the Psychic. So you do definitely need to keep that in mind with your Psychic checks. As I said, they're very terrifying Pokemon. We have Aegislash next. Probably one of the best Psychic checks you can probably get, just because of the fact that the Ghost Steel typing is just that good. You can defensively handle a lot of different Pokemon pretty well. And not only that, but also just the fact that you do have Priority Sneak. It's really easy to run a weakest policy on this and definitely revenge a lot of teams pretty quickly. Really good check in my opinion. Weavile's up next. Just naturally outpaces most of the Psychics on the board. Really just Mewtwo forms you have to worry about. If I remember correctly, I'm probably spacing on a couple good ones though. Overall, they're really good option. We have Grim, of course, just really good screen support. Sucker Punch, just good switch in general. Crook, great Scarfer, also great fat Pokemon in this tier. Also gives rocks if you want that route instead with your Dark type, which really so far only T-Tar does in this list. Keep in mind again though, there are others than just these. These are just a few that came to mind that perform really well. We have Hydra, great Scarfer, outpaces pretty much every Psychic with the Scarf, barring like Lunala, which is really the only one that would run a Scarf viably and still outpace. You also have Obstagoon, which is, again, a really good breaker. This is more so for, like, the fat Psychics, things like the Lugias, for example, or even just, like, non-Uber Psychics that might be threatening. So, definitely still a really good one. However, it's definitely not as good just because of the fact that you're not going to really take it, and most of them do have coverage for this thing. So, you do need to definitely keep it in mind when bringing Obstagoon. However, it does force a lot of really fast Psychics at least. Like, for example, Lunala will need to run pretty much max speed or near max speed for this. So it does at least force prep in that regard. And then finally, we have Incineroar. Incineroar, just a really good mon with like Assault Vest or Boots, definitely a really good check. It's also a Dark type that's neutral of Fairy, which is helpful, again, because a lot of them do have that coverage. So we'll force Focus Blast on things that do have Fairy and Fighting coverage. I believe Lunala gets Fairy and Fighting coverage, for example, if I remember correctly, so you will force Fighting coverage on that, because Moonblast would not really do that much in that regard. So you do obviously have that going for you, just because you do have now a 30% chance to dodge. So yeah. Next up, we get into Strong Walls. I'm going to start going a bit faster because I realize after 2 categories, I'm already 10 minutes in. But Strong Walls, these are just really fat mons. Basically, anything has an extreme stat. To cover highlights from this category, Buzzwole. Buzzwole is actually really fucking good in this format, being able to, again, not only be a Psychic check offensively, not defensively necessarily, but it can definitely be offensively. It's a fat Pokemon that can also be a really good Scarfer here. Not only that, but it's a really good physical check. Things like Zekrom, for example, it will force a lot of different prep on Zekrom. Not only that, but it can definitely force a lot of prep on Groudon as well, forcing things like Overheat or Fire Blast. It's a good physical check. It's also just a really good blanket check to a lot of viable Pokemon in the format. Whether Ubers or non-Ubers, I do highly recommend Buzzwole for sure. Well, whether against counting Ubers or non-Ubers, I highly recommend you draft Buzzwole in this format. I can't really speak for the Natdex general scene because I don't play it a lot, but I hear it's good there. In general, though, I do think it is really good for BBL, at least, just because of how extremely defensive it is on the Phys-Def end. Because while there aren't a ton of good physical Ubers, there are some, and they are really terrifying. There is not really a bad physical Uber of the ones that are physical. Next up, we have Sylveon. This is another highlight, in my opinion, because Sylveon gets a lot better in this format just due to the natural Spadef and the fact that it's a Fairy type. In my opinion, it's a better Fairy than Clef for the value, just because of the fact that it's more naturally Spadef. It's able to actually be 3 KO'd by things like Reshiram, Kira. Well, I don't know if Kira White. I think Kira White is it's 170 special attack. Nothing's going to switch on Kira White, especially not a predicting one. But it's a great Reshiram check. It's also a great check to just general dragons that maybe don't have coverage for fairies. So in general, though, it is still a lot more viable, in my opinion, than Clef, which gets massacred. Also things like Zekrom massacre Clefable, whereas Sylveon, while it does have slightly weaker Phys-Def, it's at least able to check the special Ubers pretty well, whereas Clefable struggles against the physical and the special ones. Corviknight, just great typing, great mixed bulk. Blissey, a lot better here because you could chew any sort of special hit and then just teleport out. It forces so much prep on a lot of special Ubers. Typically, they'll have to run mix or just have really good ways to double into and then pressure Blissey. Otherwise, I think for notable ones, like Mega Sableye is pretty cool just because it's a Ghost Dark type, so it will wall a lot of Psychics. Not only that, but Magic Bounce is pretty cool against a lot of the hazard options here, which hazards are definitely more important in my opinion in Ubers just because of how many naturally fat Pokemon there are. P2 and Goth would be the final two. Goth just because of trapping. Trapping is so good when you're picking off a threat as big as some of these Ubers. It just exponentially gets more valuable just based on what can be trapped and the fact that a lot of them don't get momentum. There are some that do. For example, obviously you have your Pull, you have your Magearna, you have Veltal that all can get the momentum on this. And you also have Ghost types that don't even have to worry about being trapped. Things like Mega Gengar, Lunala, etc. But this can trap a substantial portion of the pool if it doesn't run a Shed Shell. So it is really valuable. And then P2 just because P2 gets 3 KO'd by a substantial amount of Ubers just with its natural bulk. Really, really valuable Pokemon in my opinion, especially as a good check to these threats. Next up, we have Megas, viable Megas. Highlights in this tier would definitely be Mega Gallade and Mega Lop. I don't know, I actually didn't put Mega Lop on here, I don't know why, but I'll add Mega Lop real quick. These would definitely be highlights in the format for sure. Both really high contenders, especially this generation. Other good Megas include Mega Scizor, great Xerneas check, Mega Cesar and Dose, I already mentioned why, same as Mega Sableye. I mentioned why for most of these, but I guess Mega Slowbro is also really good because just like with the physical walls, it's really extremely Phys-Def. So that does definitely help with it. Also, it's Mega Whenever, so a lot of these Pokemon do benefit. Things like Mobile with Intimidate. You have, of course, T-Tar with possibly Unnerve if you want to fish for kills before Sand, because this Mega will set the Sand anyway. You have Mega Sableye with Prankster beforehand, Slowbro with Regen beforehand, so you do have options, of course. Next up, we have our Fairy checks. Fairy checks are really important here because so much of the dragon is dragon types, or so much of the meta is dragon types, so that is definitely very important to have a good Fairy check. I listed some offensive and defensive options if you want. We have things like Gengar, for example, really, really good one because it outpaces a fair bit of the mons in general in the Ubers tier. It's a great Scarfer, it's a great offensive Fairy check. It also has some good sub options depending on the matchup. Really valuable one. Mega Scizor, it's as good as it gets as Fairy checks. I listed Scizor as well. Scizor is still definitely a viable option as a Steel type. However, Mega Scizor is just exponentially better just because of the natural bulk. And really just the fact that it also just hits harder on top of that and is slightly faster. The speed doesn't really matter a ton, to be fair, but it does matter maybe if you're trying to creep something that's running no speed. It really just depends on the matchup, though typically it's more so the bulk and the offense that matters more. So yeah, I do think Megazord is definitely like one of the best you can get. Another really big highlight in this tier is Slowking Galar. I think Slowking Galar is definitely more valuable here just because it's Xerneas. It's a phenomenal Xerneas check. It's really, like, besides Megazord, it's as good as it comes. Otherwise, there's still a lot of good options here, but those are definitely like the highlights for sure. Fairy types, these are definitely really important. As I mentioned, there's very few, and the ones that are worth getting are very far and few between. So here we have Sylveon, Florges, Diancie, Primarina, Mega Gardevoir, Alcremie, Tapu Fini, and Togekiss. The biggest ones that I would probably recommend here would be Sylveon and then also Diancie, both really extremely especially defensive. Diancie also has some nice physical defense, however. It can definitely be, It can definitely be made to take on any Uber, depending on whatever you want to counter. Things like, for example, it forces steel coverage on Kyurem White. You could also potentially run like a Trick Room set and definitely do a lot of damage to these things as well. In general, though, Diancie is definitely a really good one. I think it's really slept on personally. It has a title even here, so that should just go to show it is a really good Uber. I have really good mon in the Uber format, just because, again, it's natural bulk. Prim's also pretty good, just because you could throw an AV on it, and it's a really, really good special sponge. Also, it just breaks really well, and also Calm Mindsets are really good on it in this format especially. Finny as well is really good, just slightly less Spit-F, so I didn't put it. I had to think of it at least afterwards, but Finny is still really good here. Next up, though, we get into Dark Checks. Dark Checks, I mostly put for this, the fact that while Darks typically do not go, it is important to have a really good Dark Check, because a lot of the mons that you will be drafting will most likely be Psychics or Ghosts. So because of that, things like Mega Medicham, Mega Lop, Terrakion, Buzzwole, all really, really notable options here. Conk as well is a really good one just because of Guts, and you get priority on that. In general, though, this is definitely a really, really good typing to have, being fighting. Though fairies are really good as well here, as I did put Mega Diancie here. I didn't put everything. I didn't run through every mon I already listed here. Like Mega Mawile could have obviously been listed here, for example. But this is just listing a few options. Again, I did not list everything you can get here. I listed the ones that I personally would seek out. Trap Pokemon. I am going to go really in depth on this one, actually, because this one does deserve it. These are Pokemon that are less valuable against the Ubers overall, especially, but in general just perform worse in this format. I would avoid these unless you pretty much have like Gypsy level skill, or just in general are like the clear best player in your division. But even still, unless you're like naturally like talented at using these Pokemon, I would probably avoid them. These Pokemon being Clefable, Hawlucha, Mega Swampert, but Rain in general, Ditto, Alolan Ninetales, and Grimer Alolan form. Grimer Alolan form I'm only putting on here, not because it's an actual trap Pokemon. I'm tired of the fact that it has 2 titles in BBL, but it's 2 more titles than I have, and I'm very sick of it. I'm very, very, very sick of it. Do not draft it. If you draft it, I hope you go 0-8. Clefable's on here. Clefable, I could list a whole Bible of calcs from mons that it doesn't even get 3-8 KO'd by. Things like Reshiram, for example, can 2-8 KO it. Kyurem Black can obviously beat it 1v1. You have things like obviously the Steel Ubers, but that's clearly going to beat them anyway. But a lot of the dragons in the Ubers format can definitely 2-8 KO, especially the non-mega ones, because they can hold items. Things like Rayquaza will nuke this Pokemon. Things like Reshiram will nuke this. Palkia will nuke this. So in general, this is definitely not as viable in Ubers as it is in non-Ubers, just because of the fact that it really doesn't go as far. Even unaware sets don't really matter, because of the fact that while you can definitely stop setup Ubers, they could just run like a Fan, Specs, Life Orb, 4 attacks, etc. and still muscle past Clef. Also because you do have to definitely really, really get pressed by not running Magic Guard. Because if you're running Magic Guard, you're losing to any sort of DD or Calm Mind, etc. Ubers. And if you're running Unaware, a lot of Ubers can just pair with T-Spikes pretty easily and just beat Clef really well. And also just a lot of mons that pair defensively with a lot of the good Ubers get really free Toxic switch-ins. As I mentioned already, a lot of good steals are on the board that are very viable, especially in this format. Also, like G-King is really good here because of Xerneas check. So there are a lot of mons that are, in my opinion, even better somehow than they are in Standard. Because for some reason, even though steals are so good already in Standard, they're even better in Ubers. So it's just stuff like that makes Clef infinitely less viable. Hawlucha already barely can get kills on things at +2 in Standard. Imagine when they have like 130, 140 Fizz Def naturally. Not as good in this format. Mega Swampert and Rain in general, just don't draft it. Rain does so much worse every time. I think the best rain season we've ever had, besides Kyogre Rain in Season 3, which I still try and burn from my memory, would be Jarrett in Season 4, I believe, when he drafted Deoxys Attack, Dialga Rain, And it was really, I think Jared was just doing it as a going out. He just wanted to say fuck it and try something fun. And he went 5-5. And Jared was like one of the better battlers we've just ever had in the BBL. And Jared is like just a really objectively good battler. And he went 5-5. Now, to be fair, this was the end of Jared's time. He was obviously a bit washed. So he would have probably, like in his prime, probably went like 6-4, 7-3. Just even still, it was also a really tough season, however. So maybe not. But regardless though, Rain, again, just historically performs bad in BBL. I would not recommend it in good faith. Ditto's on here because of the fact that it's trapped, because of its cost. People always say make Ditto more expensive. You know, you have like a second or third Uber on your team if you draft it. You really don't. It's really not worth it. I think the only time it's ever done anything of value was when Robert Panda used it. But it's also a lot less Pokemon. It's like 9 Mons versus 10 to 12. So it is definitely less Pokemon inherently. So that will objectively make Ditto slightly more valuable. But even still, I really could not recommend it in good faith. It's just not worth it. Really, we even made it more expensive just to try and hopefully make people realize it's just not worth picking. We have Alolan Ninetales next. Alolan Ninetales is on here just because of Veil. People will assume that Veil is good because, you know, you can set up Veil for fat Pokemon, when most of the Pokemon will still break you pretty well, even through Veil. Really not worth it. Next up, though, we have our column 9 onto the bottom row now with the most improved Ubers, or the most improved non-Ubers. These are Pokemon that get better just because of the format. They check certain things really well, or they just do certain roles really well. As I mentioned, things like Buzzwole just get better here. Sylveon as well get better here. But a couple Pokemon I do want to highlight. Gothitelle is the big one. I know I mentioned a bit on Goth, but Gothitelle is just exponentially better here. As I do need to preface, there are a lot of Pokemon this thing can trap well. For example, you could definitely use this thing to trap Pokemon such as man, it's really hard actually listing off specifics. Just it's always really hard to do that. But in general, this can definitely trap things really well. I guess I'll just get Goth. I already did mention it anyway. I covered everything I wanted to earlier in the video regardless. So Corviknight would be a big one though. As I said, Corviknight, just having the mixed bulk is really, really valuable here. It's also a steel type recovery, which not a lot do have. It's one of the few mons that will force Xerneas to click something besides a fairy move, being Thunder in this case, or Thunderbolt, which even then Corviknight does have a fair bit of spin for it and can also just go for Iron Heads on it. So it is definitely very valuable here. If this thing got toxic, it would be super fucking good here, and it would probably be borderline Ubers here, to be completely honest, just because of how valuable it is. Regardless of Corviknight is definitely really fucking good. Next up though, we have Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn gets a lot more valuable here as well, just because of the fact it can spike stack a lot of teams pretty easily. Leech is great for support in a lot of Ubers because not a lot of them get recovery, or at least have the opportunity to run recovery in a lot of games. So it is definitely very valuable here in my opinion. Drill will be the final one I want to mention because I'll get into the others that I didn't mention in a bit, or they're already pretty obvious to explain. But Drill definitely gets a lot more valuable here just because of the fact it's a really good rapid spinner, which is great because a lot of teams not only want to set their own hazards, but they also don't want to remove their own hazards while still removing their opponents. So spin definitely inherently is just more valuable, especially with the speed buff. Moldbreaker Drill also can definitely handle a lot of things really well. It's great for any sort of magic bounce support that a team might get, though to be fair, it's a lot less common than it would be on, let's say, like a ladder setting for like a National Dex Uber's ladder. But regardless though, it is still nonetheless definitely a very good Pokemon. Ground Steel typing is great because it can definitely check certain things pretty well offensively with that. It's overall just really good offensive typing. So yeah, I do think Drill is just inherently more viable here, especially when a lot of the Steel type, well, a lot of the Pokemon on the board as well, or a lot of teams in general will try and get killers for the things that check Drill just because they check their really good top tiers, things like Corviknight, Celesteels, etc. Which, I mean, to be fair, I guess it's inherently part of drafting. You could make that case in a standard league that people would do that for Drill anyway, but it's just a lot more required in this setting just because of the proportion of how much these Pokemon either A, can beat the shit out of Steels, or B, need someone to beat the shit out of Steels. So it is definitely, in my opinion, more valuable there. Drill also just historically has performed really well here anyway, so I think it's a really good Pokemon. Nonetheless, next up we have Ghost Checks. I did specifically mention here that I only put normal types because otherwise it would be, for the most part, just a repeat of the Dark list, or the Psychic Checker list. As this mostly includes like P2, as I mentioned, 3 killed by most Pokemon. Type Null, it's the same thing as P2, just no recovery. It's a lot cheaper of an option if you want it. I think it's like 6 points cheaper, 7 points cheaper. It's something significant, because Porygon 2, I believe, is in 12 points. It's something around there. Porygon 2, I do actually need to check that. Porygon 2, yeah, it is 12 points, and then Type Null is 7 points. So it's definitely a nice, cheaper option if you want it. In my opinion, it's still really good. I've used this thing to check a ton of Pokemon before. It's one of my go-tos in BBL just because I think it's naturally bulky and super good. We have Blissey and Chansey again, just again, natural Spadef, Snorlax, Indeedee. Indeedee is a really good one, especially if you're going with terrain. I do actually wholeheartedly mention this over, I prefer this over Tapu Lele, even though I do think Lele does improve a lot because of Psychic Terrain Sweepers, as I did already go into. But I do think that Indeedee is arguably better because it is cheaper. Lele is 17 points just because of, again, the threat that it does possess with terrain. And Indeedee is 12 points, again, because of that same sort of threat. Indeedee also will not only get the Ghost immunity for you, but also gets Expanding Force over it. So I do actually really recommend that, especially as a Ghost check. It's really, really good for that. Next up, we have Strong Removal. Good highlights from here include like Crobat, for example, being able to outpace pretty much anything, and also just get nice taunts off in a lot of Ubers. Really, really good Stall Breaker on top of really good removal. Tentacruel, really good T-Spiker. Torn T, really good with regen. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. Removal doesn't really change. Not a lot really changes about removal. It's just a lot more important here. As someone who doesn't even really like clicking removal, with things like spikes, screens, webs, etc. being infinitely more valuable here, it's just infinitely more important to have removal. We have non-Uber win cons. These are mons that historically will perform really good as win cons here, but typically aren't, like, they're obviously not your Ubers, but they are typically still star players. Things like Zeraora has historically performed phenomenal in BBL. It is currently 5th overall all time in BBL. We have things like Mega Gallade, again, really piping up this generation with things like Swords Dance, Triple Axle, and CC, able to maul most drafts. We have Lando T, really, really good win con here. It's also really good just in general, but Lando T being able to just go for SDs and massacre most Ubers, having a 91 speed, etching out a lot of box arts, is really, really valuable for it. Also, other ones include Como, just really good in this format, being able to be a nice fat option for a dragon with nice rock support. It's a lot better last gen, to be fair, but it's still really good this gen, in my opinion. We have things like Garchomp, just really good, especially with Scale Shot. We have Necrozma, which in my opinion is even somehow a scarier win con in Ubers, because you could pair it. It's a really nice offensive psychic that you can pair with some sort of non-psychic Uber and then just start massacring teams, especially if you get a really good fighting type with that. It's really terrifying. And then Mew is here. It's Mew. I'm not really going to go in depth on Mew because everyone should know that Mew does everything. It just does everything in Ubers as well. Physical breakers. We have physical breakers here. So physical breakers, in my opinion, I mentioned mons that like really, really break teams. Same as special breakers. These need to break really hard. Physical breakers I rate a lot higher because most of the Ubers are special. So we have things like Land of T, as I mentioned, Mega Mawile, like really extreme breakers. We also have stuff like Rillaboom, which has terrain to boost its breaking power. Mega Garchomp, obviously, even though it can't hold like an item such as a ban, life up, etc., it still has 170 attack. It's still a really good breaker. Megazord X and Victini are on here because while they're definitely like overall a bit more lackluster Pokemon in this format, with Groudon, these become absolute nightmares to play around. With Groudon, while I would not necessarily go like a hard Sun team, I recommend like a Venusaur plus one of those two, and you'll just have a field day. You'll have an absolute field day. We have another Pokemon on Special Breakers that is similar to that, and I'll get into that in a bit. But I do recommend those Pokemon highly with Groudon if you are looking to get Groudon. It's a very good Pokemon in this format, and these are good Pokemon to pair with it, in my opinion. Finally, I put Urshifu Rapid and Hoopa-U here. Hoopa-U just because it breaks really well on both ends, and Urshifu Rapid because Urshifu Single is not in this because it's Ubers. So it is in the Uber tier. So because it's not a non-Uber, Urshifu Rapid just is more valuable by default. We have Gengar in the Special Breakers. Gengar is really good just for similar reasons I mentioned before. Spectrier is just a faster option than it. However, it's also a more lackluster option because normals will inherently become more valuable anyway because of how scary ghosts are. So it's arguably even worse. However, there's a key however here. I would highly recommend this with Blaziken forms and Mega Lucario. Both would be phenomenal options with it if you want a really fun time with Spectrier. That would be it. Hoopa Unbound for the Special Breaker. It's also just a really good fat special mon. Just because the 130 Spadef. It's really incredible. I know Clutch tore with it season 5. He brought it to like 3 games and it massacred every time he brought it, but he still brought it to 3 games. Really cool mon though. Last mon I'll mention that's kind of unique here. This is really hard to find stuff for because as you can see, the quality is clearly less here because it's a lot harder to justify a special breaker in the non-Ubers when 2/3 or 3/4 of the pool are viable special breakers. Whereas in the physical Ubers, there's like a handful or 2 of Ubers. So the last one I will mention though is Mega Houndoom. It's just the special equivalent of running like a Megazord X or a Victini because of solar power with Groudon. It is slightly faster though, and it also is a good option around Psychic types, especially because even if there is a Psychic type faster than it, you could either go for Flame Charge or even Sucker Punch because that has an okay physical attack stat too. It's a really cool option in my opinion. Definitely can be really annoying. We have support next. Support options, I included anything here such as Hazard Sack, Screens, etc. It's a lot more vague of a category, but I felt like it still wanted to give shoutouts to things like a Celgor, which is a really good spiker here, really fast. Klefki, really good spikes, screens, defog, you name it, Klefki does it. It's also really good just because Steel Fairy is a good typing. If you draft this with a second Fairy or second Steel, it could be pretty nice. However, I've seen people make it work with just one Steel and Fairy, or even just as the only Steel and Fairy. So it can definitely be a good Pokemon. I would highly recommend it though with others. Deoxys Defense, I put a note there for speed as well. Both pretty cool options here. Still not great options. I'm not huge on them personally, but they are still cool options. They can definitely do a lot roll compression wise. Similar to Mew, just less of what Mew can do. And Deoxys Speed has its incredible speed, 180, it outpaces everything. It's literally like one of the best leads you can get. Though obviously it's not just a lead, but it is definitely like as good as you can get for Taunt, Prankster with hazard leads, etc. Well, not non-Prankster, I meant. It's good for like fast Taunt, non-Prankster leads. And then we have Defense, which is just naturally really good Fatmon. Also just really good at hazard setting. I could have put it in the walls, but I feel like it's a bit too for moves lesson for me compared to the other walls in there, so I did leave it out of there. But it is still a really good wall nonetheless. And then finally, 3 other Pokemon. All these Pokemon I did want to highlight. I'm going to put notes on these as I do them. But other Pokemon, these are just other Pokemon that were noteworthy but didn't really fit anywhere else. So first up is Venusaur. Biggest reason here is Sun. Groudon is such a good Pokemon, and this is such a good partner with it. Venusaur just is infinitely better in this format than it would be because the Sunsetter is Groudon versus a Torkoal. Torkoal is a really good Sunsetter, and it does still even have a top 5 appearance in BBL Season 2. So I can't even knock it that much. I did get 5 kills. I did feed it 5 kills, I should say, in Season 2. But it is still a good option, and it's just exponentially better with Groudon than it would be with Torkoal. Next up, we have Cloyster. Cloyster is a really good one. It's really interesting because Cloyster can do a lot of things. Smash, spikes, it has really good bulk physically. Also, Teleport is really good momentum-wise on it. So it does offer a lot. It's also removal. So it's really just a really nice roll compression mon, while also having a pretty okay typing and just in general, just very variable. Cloyster is a pretty nice option to use. I use it in Season 4 or 5. Yeah, Season 4 Free Agent did. And I think it actually could have probably torn through most of my playoffs, at least after round 1, had I not gotten hacked round 1 and lost my Goth in the worst turn possible. But in general, though, I do think the Cloyster is a pretty cool Pokemon. Very underlooked in my opinion, but it does offer a lot. I would love to see it maybe use this season. I'm kind of considering it if I'm going to be completely honest, but if someone wants to snipe me, I'm not going to blame them. I would just love to see some more Cloyster action here. Finally, we have Stakataka. Now, Stakataka is another cool one. It has Trick Room support. It also has nice physical bulk. And then also, obviously, it's just a really good breaker physically. Well, kind of, but it's still a good physical breaker. Nice hazards, good typing. Well, at least okay typing. In general, it's definitely a nice option with like a Chopper Berry or even like a Sash. You can definitely make this into a really good Xerneas check. So yeah, it's a cool Pokemon. That is going to be it for the list though. Hopefully you guys did get some ideas for maybe some non-noobers to try. Obviously there are some more that I didn't list. There's hundreds more. There are too many Pokemon and way too many variables in drafts to where this could possibly be the end all be all. But hopefully you guys got some ideas. If you did, leave a like down below and I will see you guys later. Peace out, guys.